10 of my greatest black lightweights of all times, in my opinion, must include Floyd Mayweather. And in this video, I am going to be very careful of my opinion over facts, which are my opinion. But I'm also going to be responsible for not naming Floyd Mayweather the greatest fighter of all times, because he's not. If you examine my channel, you have seen many fighters and the accomplishments that they have provided, but also the time in which they came, what they were allowed to get away with. And the reason why I appreciate Floyd Mayweather in this video is because of what he has done after the fighters that I have mentioned throughout my time on YouTube, because they paved the way for him to do what he's doing now. Had he been in the 1920s and 1900s, 1930s and 40s, he would not have been able to do what he has done now. He would probably be a 6-round fighter and nothing more, because of many things that we'll be discussing. But because of what they have done before his time, and the abilities to make adjustments in the game of boxing outside of the ring, is why it gives Floyd Mayweather an opportunity to take the mantle and to create opportunities for fighters yet to come. And that's an accomplishment in of itself. So we need to put these things in perspective and stop defending. That's not what this is about. It's about reality. It's about what opportunities each fighter has in his own era and what he chooses to do with the opportunities in his era. And that's how you celebrate a fighter. You can't make a fighter what he's not. You can't make a fighter what he hasn't proven yet. However, you can choose a fighter, look at his career, and understand what he has done during the time of which he came, and that's how you judge fighters. And Floyd Mayweather, in my opinion, in the time of which he came, he was the greatest fighter in his era in every conceivable way, not only in the ring, but outside the ring as well. Because all fighters do throughout the time of their boxing career is to create legacy and to create wealth. And Floyd Mayweather has done it better than any fighter in boxing history. So that's the difference between Floyd Mayweather's career and other boxers' careers. As far as a fighter itself, you can't judge him as the greatest because he's never been 15 rounds. He's never fought where he had 30 fights in one calendar month. He's never had those kinds of intangibles. So you can't claim him as being the greatest. He hasn't proven that. So moving forward, I want to talk about Floyd Mayweather's career in a more adult way and try to get to the reality of why I feel he deserves to be on this list as the 10 greatest black lightweights of all times. Now, before I talk about Floyd Mayweather, I just want to make one more point. You had a fighter by the name of Johnny Bratton. He was known as the Honey Boy. He was from Chicago. He would become the NBA welterweight champion when he fought for the vacant title when he was in the ring with Charlie Fusari. Johnny Bratton was as talented as Floyd Mayweather. His issue was he had a fragile jaw and fragile hands, so his career could only go so far. He didn't make it to face Charlie Fusari, who was an outstanding New Jersey fighter. And he would win the title, but he couldn't defend it against Kid Gavilan, who was a master boxer from Cuba. And that's the point that I'm making. You know, the disabilities that Floyd has with his hands, his ability to move up in weight, to face a Jake LaMotta like a Ray Robinson had done, to fight Sammy Ingat, the Clutch, to fight Frizzy Zivit. These are the fights that you have to look at. And there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of more fights that he would have had to Willie Joyce. So when you look at that from that perspective, then you have to say, you know what, we have to celebrate Floyd Mayweather in his own career, what he has accomplished, because that cannot possibly be taken away from him. So Floyd Mayweather, his name is Floyd Money Mayweather Jr. He was first pronounced as Pretty Boy Floyd. early in his career. At that point, he was a boxer. He was a man of legacy, but he would leave boxing for 2 years to get out of the contract with Bob Arum. When he came back, he was now Floyd Money Mayweather because he realized that there were opportunities of wealth. What he was dealing with Bob Arum, he could do for himself. And this is part of why this conversation is important, because we have an opportunity to be responsible enough to realize that the men before Floyd Mayweather, he has learned from. He often says he appreciates those who passed away from him. I believe that's what he's talking about. Has nothing to do with the skill of boxing, but it's the science behind how to make money through boxing. And when you look at Sam Langford in 1900s, and you go all the way up to Ray Robinson in the early 1940s. Then you go to Muhammad Ali in the 1960s. Of course, Larry Holmes, and then you move up to Mike Tyson's situation and forward. All those fights that they had, all the things that the promoters did against them, Floyd Mayweather learned from that. So that's very important to see the baton pass from one fighter to the next. When Sugar Ray Leonard turned professional in 1977, he made $40,000, and that was the largest purse for a professional fighter when he turned pro. Marvin Hagler earned $50. That was about what you made as you were coming up, turning professional from amateur. But Ray Leonard was a media darling, and he was able to negotiate his asking price. And that was a pretty stiff amount of money to ask for during that time. Now they're asking for much more, and they should, and they deserve that. Floyd Mayweather, he was a super featherweight, a lightweight, super welterweight, and junior middleweight fighter. He was 5'8", had a 72-inch reach. He ended his boxing career with a record of 50 total bouts, 50 wins, 27 knockouts, and no losses. He was born February 24th, 1977. He is currently 45 years of age as we speak. He was from Grand Rapids, Michigan. As an amateur, he would win the bronze medal in Atlanta Games as a featherweight. He would lose to a fighter by the name of Sir Rafim Davis, and that was a robbery. Floyd Mayweather should have never lost that fight. He was undefeated in those Olympic Games, and he got the shaft handed to him, as did Roy Jones, as did Evander Holyfield. Now, Holyfield did commit a foul, but it was basically at the sound of the bell, and they didn't understand that. It happened to be in a situation where Evander Holyfield was a guaranteed gold. I mean, there was no question about it. He was going to win a gold medal. But this happens to fighters, and it's unfortunate. And Floyd Mayweather should currently be the gold medal winner as we speak. So in 1998, Floyd Mayweather would face number one ranked Gianardo Hernandez. It would be for the WBC Super Featherweight Championship crown. Gianardo Hernandez defeated undefeated Azuma Nelson, who was the best of his day. He dominated that weight division for many years. And the thing is, Hernandez would be recognized as a WBC lineal champion because he defeated Azuma Nelson. Although Nelson wasn't champion then, but Nelson had dominated that division. So when Floyd Mayweather had defeated Gianardo Hernandez, he was now credited as the lineal. So the publications would give the vacant lineal championship as super featherweight champion to Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather didn't receive the Ring Magazine belt title because neither Hernandez or Nelson had it. They had got rid of the lineal status, if you will. from the middle to the late 90s, but then they would bring it back in the 2000s. So it would become extinct during the 90s. Floyd would then become the world champion and the first 1996 Olympian to become one. Mayweather would be ranked number 8 by the Ring magazine in late 1998. He would be considered pound for pound, number 8, the best boxer of that year. Now, Mayweather was recognized at the age of 21, along with Ray Robinson and Muhammad Ali. You got to take a look at that for one moment, because when Ray Robinson was given that status, it was in 1942, and then again in 1951 when he defeated Jake LaMotta. He became the middleweight champion of the world. Ray Robinson in 1942 should have been champion then. He wound up being drafted to the war because he was avoided, by giving that opportunity for his welterweight championship status. And Freddie Red Cochrane refused to fight Ray Robinson. Also, George Gangsford would offer money and other different incentives, but he wanted no part. I'm speaking of Freddie Red Cochrane of Ray Robinson. So Ray Robinson never got his opportunity in 1942 for the shot at the title. Then he would go to the war. He would leave the war. He said he fell down a flight of steps. He said he was dizzy and he woke up in a hospital in Staten Island. That's Ray's story, and we'll stick with it. But Marty Servo would defeat Freddie Red Cochrane, and he would become the champion. And Ray Robinson would defeat Marty Servo twice, and Marty Servo wanted no part of Ray Robinson. So in 46, Marty Servo would then face Rocky Graziano, and when he faced Rocky Graziano had broken his nose, and he decided to retire because his next fight was with Ray Robinson, and that he didn't want. So Ray Robinson never got his championship until 1946 when he faced Tommy Bell at New York's Madison Square Garden. Well, with Floyd Mayweather would get his title opportunity much sooner. So my opinion, when you look at Floyd Mayweather and you look at Muhammad Ali and you look at Ray Robinson, they were all master boxers. And then he would be behind Roy Jones Jr., and he would be ranked number 2 as Jones Jr. was ranked number 1. Roy Jones Jr. was a boxer as well. Pernell Whitaker would also be ranked as pound for pound in his time. He was also a master boxer. So when you look at the history of those who were ranked by Ring magazine as the greatest pound for pound, they were all boxers. As we go back to Barney Ross in 1935, he was ranked by the Ring magazine as Fighter of the Year and also pound for pound. 1936, Joe Louis was ranked Fighter of the Year, the best pound for pound as well. Henry Armstrong, who was not a boxer, 1937, he would gain that status, and he was the best during his time, because in 37, Henry Armstrong would have 27 fights, no losses, 26 knockouts, and he would pick up the featherweight championship strap from Petey Cerrone in New York's Madison Square Garden. What's interesting about that, he would be the 3rd black fighter to win a title at New York's Madison Square Garden. First, it was Tiger Flowers in 26 when he took on Harry Greb and won that title. Then you had John Henry Lewis in 35 when he took the title away from Bob Olin. And then you had Henry Armstrong. But the other thing was Henry Armstrong would be the first fighter that Mike Jacobs would have fighting in that garden, and then he would wind up winning that title. So that was a very touching moment during that time. So that's why he was selected in 37. In 38, you had Joe Louis once again. Joe Louis had defeated Max Schmeling in one round in New York's Yankee Stadium, June 22nd, 1938. And that's why he would win the Ring Magazine Fighter of the Year at that time. But then you would have Joe Louis once again in 39. You would have Billy Conn in 1940. 1941, you would have Joe Louis. Joe Louis had defeated Billy Conn, and it was one of the most. It was a beautiful fight to watch. Billy Conn was 169 pounds, and Joe Louis weighed just about 200 pounds, 199 pounds, and it was a light heavyweight fighter fighting a heavyweight, both champions in their careers. Don Dunphy, it was his first radio call, and he would call that fight brilliantly. And Joe Louis was down on the cards, and as true champion, he would come back and he would knock out Billy Conn. In 1942, Ray Robinson would now become the Ring Magazine Fighter of the Year. Now, Ray Robinson would turn professional October 4th, 1940, on the undercard of Fizzy Zivic and Henry Armstrong. Their fight was for the welterweight championship title, and Ray Robinson would be on the undercard. Now, most of the audience didn't pay to see Armstrong and Fizzy Zivic. They paid to see the professional debut of Ray Robinson. That's the kind of status he had coming out of the amateurs. But then in 1943, you would have Freddie Apostoli. 1944, you had Bo Jack. 45, Willie Peck. 46, Tony Zale. 47, Gus Lesnovich. 48, Ike Williams. 49 is Charles. 50, you had Charles. In 1951, you would have Ray Robinson again. Ray Robinson would defeat Jake LaMotta and become the middleweight champion of the world. Ezzard Charles would become the NBA heavyweight champion when he defeated Jersey Joe Walcott for Joe Louis's vacant heavyweight championship strap. He didn't get the lineal and he did not get the world championship title then because it was a situation when you had a fighter named Lee Savoy. The British Boxing Board of Control, Ring, and others did not recognize Ezzard Charles as world champion because they felt that Lee Savoy was a title opportunist for Joe Louis. When Joe Louis gave Jersey Joe Walcott a second shot in 1948. So when he gave Joe Walcott a second shot in 1948, that was supposed to be Lee Savoy's opportunity. So they didn't recognize Joe Louis as having that status. So when he fought, when he vacated the title, that portion of the title was not on the line. So it wasn't until Joe Louis would defeat Lee Savoy, and when Ezzard Charles defeated Joe Louis in Yankee Stadium in 1950, that's when they recognized Ezzard Charles as the world champion because Joe Louis would now defeat Lee Savoy. A very, very confusing situation, but that's what happened. And so Gus Lesnovich would be the champion, as far as the ring status is concerned. And so then in 48, you would have Ike Williams. Ike Williams would defeat Bob Montgomery in 1947, and he would become the unified lightweight champion. And so in 48, he would get that Ring Magazine Fighter of the Year award. You would also have a fighter, I'm trying to think of some of these guys now, Rocky Marciano. I believe in 1952, he won that title. 52, I believe it was just Rocky Marciano. 53, I know it was Carl Bobo Olsen because Carl Bobo Olsen would defeat Randy Turpin. And when he defeated Randy Turpin, it was for the vacant middleweight championship strap because Ray Robinson would vacate his title in 52 after losing to Joey Maxim in 1952 for the light heavyweight championship title in New York's Yankee Stadium. He would then retire from boxing, giving up his middleweight championship status. So when that happened, Randy Turpin, who was the British middleweight champion, had faced a fighter by the name of Charlie Holmes. Charlie Holmes was the British welterweight champion. And on the other side of the pond, Carl Bobo Olsen would have to face Patty Young. when he defeated Patty Young, it would be for the America's middleweight championship title. So now you had the America's middleweight champion and a British middleweight champion. So now Randy Turpin and Carl Bubba Olsen would face each other. And that's when Carl Bubba Olsen would become the middleweight champion of the world. And for that reason, he was now recognized as the Ring Magazine Award in 1953. Then in 1954, Rocky Marciano would get that title. He would get it again in 55. 55, Rocky Marciano would defeat the light heavyweight champion, Archie Moore. He would stop him in 9 rounds, and Archie Moore was actually a fascinating light heavyweight champion. He held that title for 10 years, from 52 to 62 when he was stripped. But that's why Marciano would gain that title. And then Floyd Patterson in 56, he got that because when Marciano retired in 1956, he would appoint Floyd Patterson and Archie Moore to fight for his title. Floyd Patterson would defeat Archie Moore, and now he would become the heavyweight champion, so he was now recognized. 1957, Carmen Basilio would be recognized because he would become champion as well. So that title comes from a long lineage of great fighters, and for Floyd Mayweather to get that recognition is an accomplishment within itself. Earlier in his career, he was only 22 years old during that time. So in 1999, Floyd Mayweather was now 22 years old, and he was now ranked by Ring Magazine number 2. And as pound for pound, he was ranked right behind Roy Jones. And he was ahead of the Golden Boy of Mexico, a Mexican-American, if you will, Oscar De La Hoya, who would become the 1990 gold medal winner in the Barcelona Games. So what's that, 1992? It was 1992. He was the 1992 gold medal winner in Barcelona Games. So Floyd Mayweather was on his way. Now, Floyd Mayweather's third title defense was against Justin Juco, and he would win by knockout in the 9th round. That was an accomplishment within itself because Floyd Mayweather was showing that he had the ability to figure out how to solve puzzles, and he was able to do that in the 9th round, and he was able to get rid of Justin Juco. Now, Floyd Mayweather would decide to make I'm sure it was a tough decision to make, but it was an important decision to Floyd Mayweather at this point of his career. He would fire his father, Floyd Mayweather Sr., and this was before the WBC Featherweight Championship contest that he would have with Gregorio Vargas. And he would replace him with James Prince. James Prince would now become somewhat of an advisor to Floyd Mayweather. And you had his uncle, Roger Mayweather, replacing his father, Floyd Sr., Floyd Sr., because in Floyd Mayweather's explanation, and I can understand this being a young man, that his father was obviously in his best interest, but his father was somewhat, for the tolerance level of Floyd Mayweather at that time, he was a little pushy. He was criticized him a lot about certain things. That's normally what a father would do. So he decided to go with his uncle, Roger Mayweather. And I do appreciate Floyd Mayweather keeping it in the family. That was important. But Roger Mayweather turned out to be a good fit for Floyd because Roger was in the ring. He was champion twice. He understood the game. He understood what was necessary. His father wasn't champion. However, his father understood the game just as well. He was in the ring with Sugar Ray Leonard and others. But I think what caused somewhat of an issue with that, in my personal opinion, of observing boxing for many years, what his father was trying to do for him, he was trying to preserve his career because his father was a defensive fighter, and he always said to him, he wanted him to work smart and have a longer career. So he taught him the shoulder roll since he was a young boy. I don't like the shoulder roll personally because if you understand really how to fight, you can break that code. Because there's only one, you can't do it as a southpaw, which Floyd Mayweather wasn't, but you can only do it off your back foot. Now, Floyd Mayweather was able to do it off his front foot, and that's what made him special with the shoulder roll. Shoulder roll was invented by a very good black fighter, and his name was Dave Holly. He was out of Philadelphia. Then you had another fighter, a couple of other fighters after that, obviously, but another fighter who was very good at it. And his name was Hammer Henry Armstrong. Armstrong came forward with the shoulder roll, but Armstrong was a master on the inside. Once the fighter stopped moving, he would shoulder roll under and in between the punches that were being thrown at him, and he would come back with an offense. That was the difference between Armstrong's shoulder roll. But then you would have Bobby Green. Bobby Green was out of Philadelphia. He was a featherweight and lightweight. He was a master at the shoulder roll. Dynamic. Then you would have Georgie Benton, who was the mayor of Philadelphia. He was a master of the shoulder roll, but he had the crab-like defense. Then Archie Moore, obviously. There's a lot of other fighters who were good at that. But these were some of the premier names who were good at the shoulder roll. Well, his father learned from somebody who learned from them. And obviously, that was a technique that he showed his son because he wanted his son to be more defensive-minded. And I think his father probably knew something about his hands because, see, the reason why Floyd wouldn't have done well in the 40s and the 30s and the 20s is because he would have had to been offensive-minded. To keep away the Jake LaMotta's, to keep off the Tony Pallones, to keep off the Rocky Grazianos, to keep off all of the forward-pacing fighters. They were too aggressive for him. And with the hands that he has, give you an example. You had a fighter by the name of Johnny Bratton. He was known as the Honey Boy. He was out of Chicago. He was a lightweight. Then he would move up to the welterweight ranks. He would face Charlie Fusari for the vacant NBA welterweight championship belt that Ray Robinson would vacate because he wanted to face Jake LaMotta for the middleweight championship title. At that point, actually, it was Marcel Sedan because Tony Zale wasn't going to fight Ray Robinson. He avoided him. He avoided all the Black Murderers Row, so on and so forth. That's another conversation. But with Floyd Mayweather came at the perfect time to do exactly what he did. And that's the reason why I'm celebrating him for his era, because no one has done it like Floyd Mayweather has done it. In or out of the ring, for his time. And his father wanted him to be defensive-minded. Now, when Roger Mayweather took over, Roger was more of an offensive fighter. This was good for Floyd because it got him the opportunities that he needed to get out of trouble, to knock out the fighters that he fought coming up. However, it did two things to Floyd. It caused some fighters to avoid Floyd because Floyd was that new, fresh, young fighter with the fast hands, and he had a name coming up in the amateurs. The other thing it did for him, it didn't help his hands. His hands became injured after each performance. I believe that's what his father tried to avoid for him. So Roger was perfect for him in one sense, and his father was perfect for him in another sense. And it's a shame they couldn't work together. But that's the double-edged sword, in my opinion. I'm giving nothing but credit to every name that I mentioned. Roger Mayweather, Floyd Sr., and Floyd Mayweather. All credit. It's just, that's the intangibles when you have to work with an offensive trainer and a defensive trainer. There's reasons for why both are in your camp. Now, Floyd would then face Goyo Vargas in Las Vegas. And that would be his fifth title defense. And what happened with Floyd Mayweather, in the 10th round, he would hurt his hands. And this is the problem that he would consistently have. He was a fighter for what the time came for him to be in. He was in the ring with Angel Man Freddy. He would stop him in 2 rounds. he was able to switch to southpaw when he hurt his right hand. He was able to make adjustments, and I think that's why Mayweather has come out on top during his time, because he was a thinking man. He had the ability to make adjustments in the ring. He had the ability to create traps and angles and get out of trouble. He had Roger Mayweather in his corner when he was fighting a fighter by the name of Emmanuel Augustus. It was a non-title lightweight affair. And Emmanuel Augustus, who was also known as Emmanuel Burton, was the kind of fighter that I'm talking about, of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. Now, those kind of fighters were not necessarily called club fighters. They were called spoilers. They were the kind of guys that would defeat an undefeated fighter. Those were the guys, because they understood, they had the experience. They understood what that up-and-coming fighter was trying to accomplish. They understood what he was trying to do, because they sparred with all the guys that those guys sparred with. And they sparred with the up-and-coming fighters. Emmanuel Augustus was a brilliant fighter. He was just the kind of guy who, he loved to entertain. And it got to a point in his career, whether he won or lost, he just wanted to be in the ring. He wanted to entertain. He wanted to challenge the up-and-coming names. And had he not had that attitude, I believe he would have been champion for a long time, because he was a brilliant fighter. And if you ask Floyd Mayweather today, who was his toughest fighter that he had to face, he would tell you Emmanuel Augustus, because Floyd could not figure him out at all. It was just the tenaciousness of Floyd and the fact that he had Roger in his corner, because Roger was in the ring with Emmanuel Augustus, and he understood what needed to be accomplished. You didn't have to look pretty at this point. You had to win the fight. And I think, as Ray Robinson learned from Fizzy Zivic in 1941, Floyd learned from Emmanuel Augustus when he fought him in the early 2000s, because Emmanuel Augustus took him to school, which is actually what happened. And it was a lesson worth learning for Floyd Mayweather. I'm going to pick this video up in video 2, so follow me on video 2 with Floyd Mayweather. 10 greatest black lightweights of all time. I'm Scrapbook Boxing Museum of the Forgotten Fist of Series. All great fights, all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. Pretty boy Floyd Mayweather.